Welcome to Category Visionaries, the show dedicated to exploring exciting visions for the future from the founders who are on the front lines building it. In each episode, we'll speak with a visionary founder who's building a new category or reimagining an existing one. We'll learn about the problem they solve, how their technology works, and unpack their vision for the future. I'm your host, Brett Stapper, CEO of Frontlines Media. Now let's dive right into today's episode.
Hey everyone, and welcome back to Category Visionaries. Today we're speaking with James O'Brien, COO and co-founder of Ducky, an internal data search for LLMs that's raised $2.7 million in funding. James, what's going on?
All good things, Brett. Thanks so much for having me. Good to see you.
Yeah, you too. Super excited to have you here. Let's go ahead and jump right in. What does Ducky AI do?
So you can think of us like a pre-LLM compute layer. And for anybody listening for whom acronyms are not friendly, LLM, think ChatGPT, right? So essentially ChatGPT has been trained on the entirety of the internet, but it has not been trained on the data that your business relies on to perform workflows and various functions. And as a result, if you were to just send that information directly to ChatGPT, all security, privacy concerns aside, what you're going to end up doing is getting an output from ChatGPT that is not specific and not proprietary to what your business is actually hoping to achieve. So we let you hook up all that data that lives within your business within a database, and then we let you essentially find what you need via API and then transform it so that LLMs can make the best use out of it. The last thing I'll say is just that everybody thinks, oh, search, cool. I'll go query something. Our search is not for humans. We search things specifically for LLM consumption because they intake data and process things differently than humans do, obviously.
I was just watching some crazy video on Twitter, and maybe it's fake, but I don't think it was fake. And it was two AIs realizing that they were talking to each other.
I just saw this too.
They start speaking in some crazy language. That is insane.
Yeah, I have absolutely no idea. I have no commentary on this, but I did make a note. I was like, I need to ask my co-founder, AKA the technical one, about this.
Now, how did you end up in this world? It sounds like there's a technical co-founder there. Is that where the problem was observed? How did you guys end up saying, okay, this is a problem that we should go out and solve?
Yeah, so I'll start by saying, before this, I was in fintech. I've been doing startups for 10 years. Started in men's shaving, doing ecological shaving, trying to get people to throw away fewer razor blades. Turns out it's incredibly antithetical to the actual business model of shaving. Fun, taught me a lot. It did not end up going well. Well, it was good, but it wasn't a successful outcome, so to speak. And then from there, I got really lucky and I was invited to join as the first employee of a fintech company down here. And we ended up getting into crypto. So I spent about 5 years in a few different roles in the crypto space. And it was enough to teach me that although crypto was incredibly intellectually fascinating, right? I think that's one of my core theses. So anyway, I'll fast forward a little bit, which is through that time operating within other people's businesses, businesses that other people had founded, I always knew I wanted to start something again. And it really helped me just kind of decide what was important to me. And I think working on something that's intellectually stimulating and doing so with people that I really like and I trust are really the only two things that matter to me at the end of the day. So when I left my previous role and I was taking a little bit of a sabbatical, I was just kind of, interviewing around and all that good stuff, and was fortunate enough to get introduced to my co-founder. And it was I don't know, it was just an amazing marriage, right off the bat. It was just one of those calls where you're I feel like I'm going to kick myself if I'm taking an opportunity to work with this human being. And thankfully, Hong felt the same way. So we were kicking around ideas. He'd been working on something that I wasn't totally convinced on. And I was look, I'd love to work together. The only thing that I ask is that we go validate this and make sure it's what we actually want to do. We went and validated it. Turned out we both agreed that it wasn't what we wanted to do. And then we were yeah, right. Now we need a new idea. So we just went out and we literally asked 155 people in the world of generally venture backed, but just tech business. What are your pains and what are your problems? And I kid you not, 9.5, I know you can't split a human, but here we are. 9.5 people out of 10 was knowledge. Knowledge, it's all over the place. We pay for all these SaaS tools, yet somehow nobody's on the same page and it's really hard to find stuff. So that's always been our grounding thesis, was making knowledge accessible to people and allowing them to use it the way they needed to build better software and work better with machines, right? The human computer interface. But it's been a bit circuitous. So we came to market with a customer support solution initially. And the whole idea for that was proactive delivery, which was hey, can we read an incoming email from a customer and say, hey, James, this customer support person, this is all the information from your Slack, from your Jira, from your Notion, from your Google Drive that you might need in order to solve this problem. Don't go hunting for it. We're going to give it to you. You don't have to search for it. We're just going to deliver it. And then can we use all of those different data sources and large language models to then generate a good email to respond to that? We did that for a while and, it was going fine. I wouldn't say like venture scale fine, but it was going fine. And then we just kind of had like a revelatory moment where we realized that like a bunch of developers had asked for access to our infrastructure, our knowledge retrieval infrastructure. And that's kind of what we're good at. Like, we weren't, totally honest with you, like we weren't the greatest at marketing in the customer support space. And that's like a huge marketing category, but we were pretty good at building this technology. So we figured, why don't we match our skill set to an audience that like really cares about ease of access and quality of technology and do something different. So yeah, that's how we got where we are. It's like, it's funny that this is, I think, actually the most distilled version of like the knowledge problem that we've ever worked on. It just took a little bit of a detour to get us here.
I think there's always conflicting advice. Like, on one hand, it's like you have to like just keep going no matter what. Like, never stop for anything. The other side is like you have to know when to change. You have to know when to pivot. How is that officially for you? Like, you're sitting there and you're like, okay, things are fine, but like obviously you didn't want just fine. You wanted pivot. You wanted hyper growth. Like, what was that like emotionally to make that pivot and make that change?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I'll start by caveating this with like, I think we had an easier time of it than a lot of folks do. And a lot of that is that like some of our investors actively invited us to pivot and like preemptively told us that they were supportive of that. And it was something that we'd been tossing around anyway. So it wasn't like a brand new concept, but just, knowing right off the bat that like these folks like had our backs, and they were like, look, guys, like we don't expect a startup's first idea to be the thing that they do forever, no matter what. Like, we're pre-seed funds, right? Like, we bet on you guys. Like, we bet on your ability to look at the market and distill it, all the feedback that's coming in. Like, we would be, it would be counterintuitive for us to tell you that when we wrote you a check and then like, two-face you on the backside. So that was really wonderful. And it just kind of like a breath of fresh air. And we were like, okay, cool. Not that we needed permission, but all of a sudden we felt like we had support to like go do this. Mm-hmm. And then the rest of it, I mean, again, like the breath of fresh air thing was just so real. Like, honestly, I just felt like my shoulders come down from my ears. And I was like, all right, we can go tackle something that we think is a better idea instead of signing up for another, God knows how long of just like slogging against this thing that doesn't really seem to be working. And like, we don't seem to like be a particularly great skill set fit for. I think the other thing that like, I joke about this sometimes. In fact, I was saying this morning when I was meeting with a friend for coffee was like, I think one of the things that we're best at as a team is validation. Like, I think we're really good at drawing relatively unbiased, to the extent that humans are capable of that, like unbiased input and feedback from people that we're interviewing or talking to. So it kind of felt like going back to our happy place in a way, where I was like, oh, cool. Like, we get to go validate something again. Awesome. Let's go research. And then the next side of it was engaging with the rest of our team. And we were very candid with our entire team throughout this process. Like, everybody pitched in, everybody knew what was going on. We didn't want to surprise anybody. And also like, we bring people onto the team who are better at what they do than we are at what they do. Right. So it's like, it would make no sense not to include them in their brains because that's why they're here. So I think like that's a good point that you made, which is that, a part of our pivot strategy was like, okay, we were doing this one thing in customer support, but do we just do a different thing in customer support? Like, do we just market to a different ICP? So we were studying multiple permutations all at the same time, which was definitely exhausting and confusing at times, but it was pretty clear after like we time boxed it to like 3 weeks and built a bunch of prototypes and showed a bunch of people. And it was pretty clear after 3 weeks that one was not only a better use of our skills and time, but also I think like a better market fit. And yeah, I don't know, it kind of started to come to fruition.
How long ago was that? When did you make that pivot?
So we started working on it in like October. So we essentially maybe like October 15th or something. So we pretty much went from like, hey, we want to pivot to like launching something in just under 3 months.
Wow. And how are things going so far? Is it better than expected? About what you expected? What does it look like?
Way better than expected. It's, when you're, not better than hoped. Like, oh man, we're going to get thousands of users. Like, everybody,
Well, yeah, first better than hope.
Yeah. No, I'm good at dreaming, No, but definitely better than expected. And I had pretty high expectations to begin with. So like, we've been really, really hardened, but it's also one of those things that like, I'm sure you and like so many other founders you talk to are familiar with, like when you're kind of in like the doldrums and really like, I would say that consistency and motivation and like optimism are some of the hardest things to hold on to as a founder when things are tough. And when you get into that muscle memory, essentially, of just like trying to psych yourself up for something that like is really hard and not going well, then things flip, right? And things start going well. And you're like, oh my God, is this like, I'm gonna take my glasses off for anybody who's listening. It's like, is this what it feels like? So yeah, I mean, it's very clear that this is something that people need. It's very clear that it's a complicated piece of technology for whom some of the like off the shelf and open source solutions, which take a long time to implement, like aren't scratching the itch. And Yeah, I mean, it's just like, it's been good. We're very heartened. The team's pumped.
This show is brought to you by Frontlines Media, a podcast production studio that helps B2B founders launch, manage, and grow their own podcast. Now, if you're a founder, you may be thinking, I don't have time to host a podcast. I've got a company to build. Well, that's exactly what we built our service to do. You show up and host, and we handle literally everything else. To set up a call to discuss launching your own podcast, visit frontlines.io/podcast. Now, back to today's episode.
What's the category? So this is, of course, Category Visionaries. So we have to always ask the question, category. What category are you in?
Yeah, so overarching category would be dev tools. A more niche category under that would be machine learning infrastructure.
Was that clear from day one? Like when you were going into this or making this pivot, we're like, okay, we're in like machine learning infrastructure category.
Yeah, I would say so. Mostly just because, like, again, we built all this stuff for ourselves for the customer support app. So like we knew what it was. We knew how to build the tech because we already been it. And like we were our own customer, right? Like we couldn't find something we were happy with on the market. And we knew that we had the chops within the team to build it from scratch. So it was pretty clear what it was. I have been very surprised by a number of things since releasing it to market. It's still in the same category, but there are certain like core qualities of like the ICP that I've been surprised by. So I've definitely learned a lot, even though I feel like I thought I knew.
What were the most surprising things so far?
I think the most surprising thing is that every company under the sun, and maybe that's hyperbole, but I don't think it's really aggressive hyperbole, has been tasked to do something. And I mean this in like literal quotes, do something with AI. And what I've been surprised to find is that many companies don't have really any clue what that is. And because it's this new fancy shiny thing that people have read like so much about, and I think they bought the hype a lot. And I'll give a quick example on that, which is, like it will work with Chat GPT and it will be able to know your business, right? Like that's just not how foundation models work unless you train them and you refine them and you all that good stuff, which requires a lot of money and a lot of time. So I think that's what I've been the most surprised by, which is that people are like, hey, we got to do something with AI, but we don't know what that is. And then they think so deeply about, hey, how are we going to construct this? And like, what model? Look at this model versus that model. It's so cool how they operate differently. And it is really cool. But like one thing that my co-founder loves to say is like, nobody brags about the fact that they code in Python, right? Like it's really just another piece of a technological stack. And like the question that a lot of these companies aren't asking themselves is, what feature am I trying to build for people? And like, what business value does it have, right? Like how you construct it is a second order question in my mind. Whereas the same old question is still the question, like, what are we trying to do and what value does it have? And it's just interesting to me that like all the hype around AI has kind of like shifted people's focus away from that one core thesis and question. And it's more to like, how am I going to use the new model?
When you have everyone using AI, how do you decide which segment of the market to focus on?
That is a great question that I'm currently wrestling with, Brett. Yeah, I mean, like, I think the flippant answer, and I don't mean that like in a disrespectful way, but just like the easy, quick answer that's actually pretty real is like wherever we see the best pull, like that's a good spot to start, like the age old, like, beachhead, land and expand kind of thing. Like, I think that makes a lot of sense for us. And to be clear, did you mean like for us specifically or like for just like people in general? Cool.
No, really specifically.
All right, cool. Yeah, for us, it's like we do our best work with unstructured data. So like open text, right? Like that's where semantic search plays really, really well. And it's also where the innate, or not innate, maybe, human engineered, but regardless, we'll just call it innate capabilities of large language models can pick up the slack, right? It's like, I don't need to tell 4.0 that this one word is on this one page. It doesn't care about that, right? Like it just cares that I'm giving it a concise, and again, I realize you can give it a ton of information, but I would make the argument that like it's actually not in most people's best interest to do so. Like I need to find the right information, I need to give it the right information, and then I need to ask for the right thing from it. And like if those businesses are especially doing that with, like just in time requirements, like they need low latency and they need to do it at high volume, like that's what we do really well. And I recognize that's still a very large description that describes a lot of different companies. And we're still trying to figure out exactly like where we should go within those descriptors. But those are kind of some of the high level characteristics that we've seen thus far.
And how do you target those companies? I have to imagine like they don't have it on their LinkedIn, right? They're like, oh, like this is what we're doing. Like, how do you know a potential customer to go after?
Yeah, no, they do not. So right now, a fair bit of trial and error. I'm, as I'm sure you can't tell, a bit of a people person. So I'm pretty shameless about asking for introductions, right? Like if somebody says, hey, call my LinkedIn, see if there's anybody interesting. Like you bet I'm going to do that. So that's how, and it's, I won't bore you with like my prospecting process here, but it's like, is this a company that I think has not built this core infrastructure themselves? Do they have the technical chops on the team that would be able to implement something like this, but not necessarily want to take the time or have the expertise to build it in-house? Are they dealing with a large volume of unstructured information? And are they trying to do something that is like some semblance of volume, like generative volume, right? Like, are they trying to generate a bunch of articles? Are they responding to a bunch of chatbot inquiries? Are they doing a bunch of summarization? Something of that nature. Yeah. So I just like essentially hop between LinkedIn and websites and I look back and like, yes, before anybody asks, like we are going to build some AI to do that for me. But right now, I think, at least for me, it's a valuable learning process to like do it a little bit more manually so that I can get the characteristics down before I try to outsource it to computers.
I think that's so important. I think a lot of founders get that wrong. They're just so like desperate to like delegate prospecting that they like delegate it to someone who has no idea what they're talking about. And like that can change the trajectory of the business, I think, right? If you're not there just grinding away at it.
Yeah. And I get it. Like, we talked about this a little bit before we started recording. Like, I get it. It is a lot of time. And if you're not somebody who like loved being an SDR, like it's not going to be something that you necessarily enjoy. And don't get me wrong too. Like, I'm sure a lot of people could build automated processes for these things with like really good data tagging, and that would be sufficient for them. Or they want to play like a really high volume game that like refines over time. Cool. Like, that's just not my skill set. And our team, our tech team is like so busy building core product. Like, I don't want to bother them with this stuff. So this is the system that works for me and works for my brain. And then, once we have a decent mass of early users, which seems like it'll be sooner rather than later, I'm grateful to say, like, then we can turn to, first do the thing, then make it repeatable, then make it scalable, right? Like, we're flirting with the repeatable. I'd say we're like midway through the repeatable phase, which is good. I think I'm happy where the process is for now.
And how are you acquiring those customers then? Are you just doing cold outreach? Hey, Ryan Ducky, or like, how are you acquiring them?
Yeah, it's a bit of cold outreach. It's a lot of asking for introductions. It's a lot of, honestly, like, and I shouldn't say a lot because I need to get better about this, but, posting to LinkedIn and just being like really, really judicious about like going through the comments and the likes and reactions, because very often like those are people who get what I'm saying and they then like have a need for the product. So that's been really big. And then honestly, the last thing is like, the startup scene down here in Nashville has like really blossomed over the past couple of years. And, there's one woman down here who's just like the absolute startup czar. She's like the torchbearer. And, she helped us with our pivot announcement and it did way more traffic than I ever thought it would. And she's, started like a startup community and co-working space down here where I found a ton of optionality as well in terms of customers. And, again, like the nice thing about being in Nashville is like, I'm not an SF where ML infra companies are around every single corner, right? So especially given like where we are in a stage right now, where like, even though we want it to be a PLG product, I'm still very willing. And I think it's in our best interest to have multiple conversations to understand what people are trying to build and even help them to understand how to build it, even if it's not something that like we necessarily do within our software. So again, like, I just think the tenor of the Nashville startup scene, like that specific playbook and like where we are as a business is really well aligned right now. And that's what we've been doing thus far. I think the next step is predominantly education and content focus, which is, how can I take somebody onto like, stop 3 out of 5 in Imagination Station so they don't have to do all of the mental lifting of like, hey, what the hell is this thing? How does it apply to me? What would I build? How does it apply to my industry? And give them, really good sandbox, really good documentation, really good examples and testimonials of like what other people have done or what could be done. And I think, at least from what we've seen thus far, like that will be a good catalyst. And then I got to, figure out how to have people follow me on Twitter, which is not something I'm great at right now.
Just going to post bangers. That's the key.
But yeah, easy. Great. Easy.
This show is brought to you by the Global Talent Co., a marketing leader's best friend in these times of budget cuts and efficient growth. We help marketing leaders find, hire, vet, and manage amazing marketing talent for 50 to 70% less than their U.S. and European counterparts. To book a free consultation, visit globaltalent.co.
I love the approach to the content there that you just described. What else are you going to be doing to really rise above all that noise that's out there? You're like, I'm in SF, like I walk around, like all anyone's talking about is AI. It's like impossible to escape. I just want to go walk my dog and there's people talking about AI. It's like, how do you stand out in this noisy world?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's 3 things. One, I think is hopefully a vestige of our name, like Ducky. It's fun, it's accessible. I think we can do a lot of cute, cheeky stuff with it that makes us feel not just like another tech company. I don't think that alone will drive the kind of traffic that we need to, be a gigantic company. but I do think it matters in a world where there's a lot of like copy and paste websites, like, the Linear website over and over, and all credit to Linear for doing it first. It's a friggin' great website, but now there are tens of thousands of them. I think the second is like, again, like empathetic education, right? And this is a mistake that I made when we started doing this, was like assuming that just because I'm speaking to technical people, that they know how this works, they understand the importance of it, and they know how to hook it up to the rest of their software, right? Like most developers in the world are not particularly AI conversant, and that's fine. It's new, right? And a lot of these tools do a lot of the heavy lifting for you, which is obviously why we're here too. But like, I don't know, I think there's a lot to be said for like that empathetic and educational voice, so that everything you put out is like not only instructional, but also understanding. Like, don't just try to meet people where they are and not assume that everybody is an AI rocket scientist, so to speak. And then I think the third thing, again, is just like being really, really good at like one thing. And for us, that's retrieval, right? It's like you got a bunch of data and you need to let APIs find the right thing before you send it to an LLM. That's exactly what it's going to be. And I think the spin on that for us is really like the grander vision, which is like, hey, can I let anybody who's even quasi-technical get optimal use out of large language models without, again, having to go through the process of like training, reweighting, things of that nature? Because like, in a world that I'm sure you've talked about this with other guests too, where LLMs are just like, it seems like a race to the bottom in terms of pricing and a race to the top in terms of quality. It's really about like, hey, how can I make the most use out of this? Like, we have a platform shift like every week and a half these days, right? Like, how can I make sure that I can stay above the chaff? And that really just comes down to like, we always say, like, how can I get our clients promoted, right? Like, how can I make your job better and make you a friggin' rock star? And I think that of all the rambling I just did at you, I think that's probably the biggest thing, which is like, if you build something that people love and they're willing to tell other people about it, especially for a PLG tool, like that's the highest compliment that I could ever hope for.
We were talking about story brand a little bit pre-interview. Like you've already got that part down, that every company they make themselves like the company, the hero of the story. And like, that's not what anyone wants. Like they want you to be a guide that's supporting them. Like they don't give a shit about you or anything about you. Like, here's about ourselves, right? I think so many companies make that mistake, especially I think on like tech heavy side of products. Like they just make it all about them, how great they are, or their features. Like no one cares. Like they got themselves.
No, nor should they. And like to take it one step further, again, like we're in the infrastructure game, right? Like if you never know I exist, but your tool works way better than anybody else's, like that is us doing our job super well. And, in a way it's a risk too, right? Because like, I'm not saying this would never happen if anybody's listening and wants to work with us, but like powered by Ducky is like not really the play here, right? It's like, how can we just give you incredible infrastructure that works because it's usage-based pricing too, right? And I think that's, to divagate a tiny bit, like, that's one of the things I'm the most excited about with this pivot is just like, it seems like our skills, the actual software, the pricing model, and more importantly, like the value alignment is like all just right there. It's like, if you use it and it works, you will use it more. And that means that we're doing our job. And that's awesome. Like that's all I ever want to do, quite frankly, is get paid for actually bringing value to people.
It's a noble mission, I would say.
Well, I hope so. But more importantly, like, I don't know, it just seems right. Like, all of us founders and startup and, ecosystem people, like we know a lot about being overcharged for multi-year contracts that have provided us no value or we haven't even used until like year 1.5, right? And that's all well and good. I get it. I signed a contract. That's on me, not on you, but it doesn't feel good. And it's not a great way to like make evangelists out of people. And I don't know, it seems like one thing my co-founder loves to say is like, what's the point of running a company if you can't do it in a way that feels good? And I think about that all the time, which is like, because I get up and do this every day and like genuinely jazzed up about it, most days, it's just a lot easier when you don't have to kind of like slap yourself in the face and drink 17 cups of coffee, like just to feel jazzed about something. Like it's nice when kind of like the philosophical theses of what you're working on actually feel good to you as a human. And I'm grateful to say that it's very easy to feel that way, not just like the direction we're headed, but the team that I'm lucky enough to work with.
Let's talk about fundraising a little bit. So in the intro, I mentioned over 2 million raised to date. What have you learned about fundraising so far?
Yeah. The first thing I learned was that I didn't run a very clean process the first time, which is funny, but also I'm sure for a lot of people who have done it, like not surprising, like you'll probably be either shaking your head or nodding your head along. So I used to be a part of a company called Alto IRA, which is a fintech company down here in Nashville that does retirement accounts for non-publicly traded assets. So crypto, real estate, a lot of venture funds, a lot of startup deals. It's, Eric Satz, their CEO, and that company like taught me so much. I would say like most of the things that I knew prior to Ducky about startups. But anyway, as a result of that, like I got to be very close because I was super early at the company. Like I got to be very close to a lot of fundraising, and we were dealing with venture funds all the time, venture capitalists, startups raising money, accepting wires from IRAs, all that good stuff. So I was like, all right, cool. I know this world super well. And like I've made intros to Eric and like helped raise some money for the company. Like this is no big deal. Like I totally got this. Not at all. It's totally different when you're running a process for yourself, like totally from scratch. Even just like the end game of fundraising, right? Like the last 72 hours when like term sheets are coming in and you're deciding and you're setting wire deadlines. Like that is such a pivotal moment that like I never had any exposure to because I always passed over intros, right? I was like, oh, cool, my job here is done. So firstly, I learned that I did not run a very clean process, and I would run a far more regimented process that looks a lot more like a sales process the next time we do it. I would do it in tranches. I would have my phases and my tiers of different funds, our familiarity level, their likelihood of investing level, all that good stuff. And, we've been keeping spreadsheets running ever since our first fundraise. So I feel pretty good about that. The other thing I learned is you don't want to go close the friends and family portion of your capital on the day that Silicon Valley Bank collapses. Learn that the hard way. Yeah. So like our original, and this is, I think, one of the reasons why it like took us longer than I would have liked to, was like we went to close that first like very small tranche comparatively to what we ended up raising of capital on literally the day that SVB collapsed. And everybody was like, yeah, guys, love you, but like you need an institutional lead to like underwrite this thing now because the whole game has changed. And we're like, fair, setback. So that led us towards essentially just like changing the narrative, right? Like we went from like, hey, we're going to raise a little bit of money, go put some numbers on the board, go back and raise some actual institutional capital. That led us to immediately and unpreparedly then needing an institutional lead, which was not something that we were expecting or preparing to do. So, I hope that nobody has to prepare for that exact eventuality, but not changing your narrative and your needs halfway through is something that I would definitely recommend. Like really think long and hard about what you're trying to accomplish and then like run that playbook. If you have to pivot midway through, which many people do, and it's A-okay, like you can get it done. But it was a big time lag and it was a lot of like mental gymnastics and whiplash to go through that.
I get PTSD even mentioning that bank collapse. That was the most intense weekend of my life. One of our employees messaged me and they're like, oh, we bank there. I'm like, no, we're fine. And I'm like, we're not fine because every one of our fucking clients banks there. It's like, we're done. Yeah. If we lose all their money, we lose money. Like, we're done. Yeah. Like, you can't survive just all of your clients having no money overnight. And we're just like that whole weekend. I'm like, what do I do? It's like, I'm getting through the pandemic, go through all these things. And like, this kills you. It was such an insane time.
Yeah, dude, it was so wild. I mean, again, like we were literally in New York to close this in person, and like our counsel who was there was just like dipping in and out all day on the phone. We're like, guys, so sorry, I got to take this. I'm like, yeah, of course. Deals with companies who are far larger than ours who had a lot of money that was locked up. Yeah, it was a tumultuous time.
Yeah, that Sunday afternoon, like they announced everything's okay. I'm like, yes,
yeah, we're back.
We're back. All right, man. Final question for you before we wrap up here. Let's zoom out 3 to 5 years into the future. What's the big picture vision look like?
Yeah, so I kind of already alluded to it, but the big vision here is really just to make AI systems accessible to people. Like we want to create tooling that can self-refine and can cater to people all across the levels of technical capacity, such that they can make excellent use of AI, predominantly large language models, or potentially, the next big thing that comes out that none of us know about yet, so that you can get like truly tailored and excellent results from a system that does not require training a foundation model yourself.
Amazing. I love it. All right, man, we're going to wrap here. Before we do, if there's any founders that are listening in that want to follow along with you, where should we send them?
You can send them to me via email. Anybody, James at Ducky, DUCKY.ai, hit me up. Those proverbial DMs are open. Also, James O'Brien on LinkedIn. I'm much better about checking LinkedIn messages than I ever have been before in my life.
Amazing. I love it. Thanks so much for taking the time. It's been a lot of fun.
Thank you, Brett. I really appreciate it.
This episode of Category Visionaries is brought to you by Frontlines Media, Silicon Valley's leading podcast production studio. If you're a B2B founder looking for help launching and growing your own podcast, visit frontlines.io/podcast. And for the latest episode, search for Category Visionaries on your podcast platform of choice. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you on the next episode.